Court advocates this evening. Salman Khurshid, who is also, of course, Union Law Minister in the UPA. We also have with us Supreme Court Advocate Sai Deepak. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Just the two of you. I want you to first, Mr. Khurshid, tell me why there is a prevailing fear amongst Muslims and a large number of the liberal intelligentsia that there is a project to construct a Hindu Rashtra.
Well, to be fair,
either there is a lag or Mr. Khurshid takes like 5 seconds to buffer.
The aspiration for a Hindu Rashtra, whatever that means, I'm not even sure there is clarity about what a Hindu Rashtra means. We can go into the specifics in a moment, but there is ample data and evidence available that people have been speaking of a Hindu Rashtra, or speaking of dimensions that point towards a Hindu Rashtra. If they don't want to bring about a Hindu Rashtra, then they can just simply say that we have no intention of bringing about Hindu Rashtra. Let's be clear that the dominance or the significance of the beliefs of the majority in our country have to be respected, and they are automatically fed into the system and are part of the system. That's what a majority-minority democratic situation and a constitutional law is about. Therefore, these are not a binary that you're either for a Hindu Rashtra or you're against any form of Hindu influence in our way of life, in our way of national life. That binary is not available. And if that binary is used, it's used dishonestly. I do believe that this is the ground reality.
This is the ground reality. Okay, Sai Deepak, we are seeing the scenes now in the Karnataka Assembly. Legislators on mattresses spending nights, virtually blockading the House, saying 5 sedition charges. If you don't, we know what you are up to. You're going to realize this dream of flying the saffron flag, which will end any pretenses of India being a secular, liberal country. How do you respond to this?
I think I agree with Mr. Khurshid on the point that there is no clarity with respect to the nature of this Hindu Rashtra. Therefore, at this stage, to speculate as to whether a Hindu Rashtra, as it stands in terms of what it is meant to be or what they want it to be, will it translate to an anti-minority bias? I really don't know what is the basis of this particular conclusion.
I agree as well, because people keep harping on this point that they want India to become a Hindu Rashtra from both sides. I mean, the other side says that there is danger that India will become a Hindu Rashtra, and this side says they want to make India a Hindu Rashtra, but neither of them know what it actually entails. Is there a draft, a constitution, or whatever to signify what would it mean to be a Hindu Rashtra? Nobody knows, but it's just like a political line that people just want to keep on repeating so that it remains relevant in political terms.
I think when you mention or when you speak of a Hindu Rashtra, we have to take into account what is it that most people who have been the proponents of this particular idea, what is it that they have said? The point that has been made repeatedly is that you do not deny the dharmic antecedents of this particular civilization, and you do not try to sever its present from its past, but that does not in any manner translate to shrinkage of the rights of minorities which have been promised under the Constitution, and put faith in the fact that even when this Constitution did not exist, it is this particular land that has welcomed non-Hindu minorities from across the world who were persecuted. Therefore, first of all, I think there is a need for some kind of clarity on the metes and bounds and the outer limits of this Hindu Rashtra. Therefore, a definition is important. As Mr. Khurshid is a lawyer and I too am a lawyer, both of us know for a fact that definitions ultimately form the basis of any particular structure or superstructure. So therefore, I'm actually happy to have a discussion on the metes and bounds of this, and I think Mr. Khurshid is completely right on this particular aspect. Second, if the statements of certain individuals are to be treated as the basis for what would be the nature of this Hindu Rashtra or priority position, then I must effectively point out the statements made by several leaders from these so-called secular parties.
I'm smiling because whenever this kind of discussions happen, there's a tendency to quote statements from random people as if their statements are something that are followed throughout the country, that their statements are actually the law of the land, which is not the case. So right wing will quote statements from left wing leaders, left wing will quote statements from right wing leaders, and that is just to score certain brownie points in a particular debate, but it's not going to have any bearing on the ground reality. So I think when the discussion turns that way, then you're not able to gain anything. It's not a discussion of idea, it's just plain whataboutery, and nobody's gonna win. Nobody is gonna come out of that debate a winner, because you have successfully wasted your time. A healthy debate would be when you discuss certain ideas and you decide what should be rather than what has already happened, or what somebody has said, as if their statements matter in any way. Unless they're in a certain very big position, like Mr. Modi or Rahul Gandhi or whatever, like who actually define how the lawmaking will happen. So quoting statements from random people does not help any discourse.
As well as by the Owaisi brothers with respect to Hindus, their beliefs and whatnot, when in fact the very integrity of the Indian state has been challenged, and effectively it's been said that you remove the police machinery and you see what happens. All kinds of inflammatory statements have been made. So if those statements don't reflect the large minority, the large section of the Muslim population going by what they say, then why should the statement of a few individuals, even if they're elected MPs, translate to a reflection of what is a Hindu Rashtra? So I don't think you should use the worst of, let's say, examples from each side to understand what is the same position with respect to each side. If you're asking for sanity, then you ask for what is it that the average Hindu says with respect to this, what is it that the average Muslim says with respect to this. As long as these metes and bounds of the discussion are not clarified, I think it's easy for us to trade statements made by each other. I can cite 10 different statements and he will cite 5 different statements, and ultimately what are we left with? The discussion doesn't move forward. The core issue is this. One, why is there a need for a discussion on Hindu Rashtra? Why does it start? And is it recent? 2, what is the potential shape or prospective shape of this Hindu Rashtra? 3, from a constitutional perspective, what would it actually translate to? What would it have? What would be the direct bearing of this particular issue or this particular phraseology or this particular mindset on what we know as secularism today? In this regard, I'll just make one point and I'll leave it for you to take it further. If you look at the history of evolution of secularism in Europe and in every other place, it has never required any of these countries to give up their Christian identity or their own religious identity. Secularism, when followed in Europe, United States, and every other place which happened to be the mothership, so to speak, of this particular construct, have been very clear that while we clearly identify ourselves to be either a Christian nation or a Protestant nation or a Catholic nation, we promise that we will give equal rights to others who do not subscribe to this particular denomination or this particular faith. So secularism is actually what is known as Christian secularism. Therefore, when they speak of a Hindu Rashtra, my assumption would be, and since I can't be the spokesperson for anybody else, based on what I've read so far, the ideologues of this particular point of view have specifically said it would effectively translate to a Hindu secular state, which means we will not sever the roots of this particular land and the identity of this particular land from the present. At the same time, we will treat everybody with a certain degree of respect and at par with each other as far as the law is concerned. To that extent, in principle, I genuinely don't see a problem. But if the idea is to say India and therefore Bharat should effectively give up its entire heritage, its civilizational heritage, that I think would be a stretch, because it takes forward whatever we have suffered for the last 1400 years or 1500 years. That may not be right. Every culture and every society has a right to assert its core identity, but that does not need to come at the expense of anybody else's identity. But if someone else believes that the assertion of the native identity is necessarily anti-particular group, then they have to really ask themselves, why have they positioned themselves in such an adversarial position or fashion as far as the native identity is concerned? That's a question for them to answer, not for the majority to answer.
Okay.
So as far as what my understanding is, and this is something that I'm extrapolating from his argument, I could be way off, but what I feel is that the core identity, the civilizational identity of Bharat has been suppressed for a very, very long time. So before independence, there were British. Before British, there were these Mughals, Muslim rulers, invaders. So the core identity has been suppressed for so long that if we continue to do it even after independence in the name of secularism, which is nothing but a Christian form of secularism that has continued even after the British has left, then I don't think it is fair to call this independence, because the civilizational identity is still being suppressed. So, okay, we follow a certain principle, we respect other people, we want that everybody is considered equal in front of the law. But that should not necessarily mean that we give up our own civilizational identity in the name of that. So I think both should be able to go hand in hand, and there should not be any problem with that. And I think that's what he means by his definition of Hindu Rashtra.
Salman Khurshid, look, you wrote a book. The book was challenged in court, its release. There was a ban on its publication. Of course, that was thrown out. It's called Sunrise Over Ayodhya, Nation Undina Times, where you allegedly compared Hindutva with the Islamic State and Boko Haram, etc. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, of course. We also had a conversation about that. You know that Mohan Bhagwat, who represents the RSS, that has or subscribes to a Hindutva worldview, has talked about the concept of a Hindu Rashtra, and it is not divorced really from a concept which we all recognize, which is Hinduness, which is quite open and tolerant. It presages really not a way of life, but a view on life. So it is quite open. Yet there are individuals such as yourself who equate the RSS or the Congress party, for instance, that equates the RSS with the ISIS and Boko Haram. How does this square, sir?